Hi folks, I'm Glenn.
Hi Maureen.
And we are excited because we are going to be regaining our peace, our quiet, and our serenity. We have been prepping for lockdown and we are moving to the off-grid cabin in the wilderness.
That's right, we have news, info, and a story I've never shared with you before.
So this is our 5th year at the homestead and off-grid cabin in the wilderness here. And while we've been living in the woods, we're accustomed to it over the last 30 years or more. And this experience of being on the land in this part of Ontario has been unique. And it's just going to be great to finally get back to the cabin. Part of the reason why we are doing what we're doing is I just want to take a break and get back to the cabin. I noticed that when we were living in the cabin for the first time for a 4-month period over the winter, the peace and quiet, the serenity, the quietness at night, the stillness, and the complete and utter darkness with no electricity, none of the amenities. It was really getting back to simplicity. And I noticed when we moved to the homestead where we had electric power for our lights and whatnot, the refrigerator was running. You could flick a light switch and boom, there's the light. I mean, it was amazing. What a luxury to have, after a long winter of not having any of that. But it doesn't take long to start to become accustomed to that. And you hear the humming of all the motors and all the appliances and whatnot that are on in a household and all that kind of a thing. And not that we have that many, but just the same, when the power goes off, if there's a storm and everything goes off, no lights and nothing, it is really quiet again. And it kind of makes us feel like we're back at the off-grid cabin. So for me, that's a little bit of a return to back to the land, back to simplicity, regain our peace and quiet, and to enjoy a bit of a retreat.
Yeah, and it's going to help us re-hone our self-reliance skills that we learned up at the cabin and being off-grid. Minimalizing is a real thing. Like, we really minimalized our life, and like Glenn said, it's really easy to slowly get back to the old lifestyle. So I'm looking forward to getting back to minimalizing our life.
We want to have less dependency on the grid and on the overall system, on the infrastructure that we would normally, want to rely on for conveniences and everyday living. But in these strange times that we're under, we don't know how solid our supply lines will be. We're not sure if there's going to be interruptions in our power and in all these conveniences that we have, that we take for granted when we're on grid. And we don't know if if suddenly that switch is going to get flicked and we have nothing. So for us, it's a good idea to practice our taking a step back and being less dependent on the system and on the grid, and voluntarily shut the lights off, shut that power off. In this case, we're moving back to the off-grid cabin, and it's going to be back to living in the wilderness again, and back to, as Maureen said, back to the minimalism and back to simplicity. Jakey, you smell? Yeah, you smell something? So this is a dry cabin here. There is no running water, no shower, no sink, no plumbing of any kind. There's no electric power for lights. We have a couple of solar lights that we use, and battery operated lights. There's
so dry cabin. It's all about, there's no flush toilet, there's no sink to running water to wash your hands in. We have a camping potty. We're going to explain all this in another video. We have the camping potty, we have a sink. All of our drain water has to be hauled outside. We got a place to dispose of it. And so any services that just become as a convenience in an on-grid home are totally removed from our cabin, being a dry cabin.
So it's a completely off-grid cabin. Doesn't have a lot.
But what it does have is peace and quiet It is so beautiful here. When we first came here, the first morning I got out of the van, and there was nothing. It was like we arrived to that dream property.
You know, the first time that we'd moved into the cabin, we noticed it was just so peaceful and still. The night air was calm. There was a full moon. There was fresh snow in the forest, and the light of the full moon going through the forest with the shadows of the trees streaking across that pure white snow. And it was just so blissful. The wolves howled in the distance, and we could hear the hoot of a barred owl nearby. And we'd felt we had arrived. This was something that we had wanted for so many years and strived for. And we knew that in our retirement years, this is what we wanted to experience. This was our dream. Yeah, we're looking forward to it. Once again, living full time here at the cabin. And, you know, last time we were kind of thrust into the situation of moving from our, living in the van and, migrating from an RV over to the cabin. And we had a lot of challenges along the way. And we learned to be like the willow, strong enough to endure the hardships and flexible enough to bend with the challenges and find alternative ways dealing with those challenges. Be like the willow. So this is a test for our lockdown of the voluntary nature before it might become mandatory and supply lines possibly getting interrupted. We have been prepping for several months now, and we have our food, our water, our supplies, our dry goods, all that kind of a thing. And now we feel it's a good time to take a step back and come back to the off-grid cabin. But no matter how it goes, and no matter how we plan to do this move, we figure there's probably going to be something that throws a curveball at us. It usually does seem to work out that way. Maureen, over the years, we've had many a curveball thrown at us. Thank you.
We sure have. And it's an important lesson that we learned is you need to, similar to what Glenn said about being a willow, you also need to be ready for the curveballs that get thrown at you, like what happened with us. And this is a story that we've never shared with you before. When we started our plans for moving on to an off-grid property, onto an unorganized township property, our plans were to acquire the ownership of the land by the end of August, and then camp in our van on the land while our homestead was being built, with the date planned for the end of October to move into the homestead before the snow flies. Well, wouldn't you know it? And you gotta listen to this.
We expected to be camping for about a month, which we could handle because we were used to camping in the bush anyway.
Oh yeah, I was so excited about camping in the van. So you're not gonna believe this. You gotta listen to this. At the 11th hour, the seller's lawyer dropped the ball on us. We had planned, okay, we sold the other house, we're gonna get our deed, we're gonna camp in our van, and yeah, well, he dropped the ball, delayed us purchasing this land and getting the deed by 2 or 3 days, which really isn't a big deal. It's not too much of a deal, except
we figured, okay, another week of camping.
Yeah, but that delay of 2 or 3 days delayed us acquiring the deed for 2 months. 2 whole months we were delayed. So we had to camp in the van.
There was a cascade of events that took place. The lawyer dropping the ball, not getting the paperwork sent out on time to be registered, and then registered over to the planning committee. The planning committee is only open 1 day a week in this neck of the woods, which meant if you got there, it was another week before it would get looked at, if it got looked at that following week. So, and then we found out that the person who looked at it went on holidays. It was coming up to hunting season and whatnot. and here it was October, and it was getting mighty cold. We were staying in an RV, which was a little bit more room, a little warmer, but it was getting frosty at night. We were literally freezing, waking up in the morning at 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So.
And by that point, by the time that the deeds were registered and we had ownership of the land and and could build on it, the window had closed on us for building before the snow flies.
Yes, you don't construct a home without getting it at least closed in with a roof and closed in, by the 1st of November, mid-October maybe, before the snow flies and whatnot. You got to have that foundation, all the concrete, everything set up. You can't be doing stuff like that with the threat of snow and bad weather closing in fast. So it was a nail biter for us. It was very stressful. And this time when we moved to the cabin, we don't have any of that stress on us.
No, we're all ready. We have our experiences from last time, because last time I had planned to be in camping in the van during warm weather, not worrying about cold. Well, all these delays thrust us into having to build the cabin. I wasn't prepared for being in the cabin for 4 months, so
right.
So
you were thinking of having an outdoor kitchen at the camp, and not an indoor kitchen in a cabin that we had to very quickly erect so that we were in and out of the cold.
And because so I thought, okay, we'll get the cabin going, we'll get that built, we'll get in, I'll get my outdoor kitchen. Well, wouldn't you know it, 2 days after the cabin was built, it snowed.
Actually, Maureen, it was the very night that the roof got put on. It snowed that night. I remember waking up in the morning and seeing all the white skiff of snow on top of the green roof, and there was no insulation inside yet or anything like that. So I hurried up and I got that insulation in as quickly as possible. We put the vapor barrier on it, and we were in that cabin that very night with some heat, and we had a Mr. Buddy heater and cracked the window open a little bit. We were all good.
Yeah, so our plans really changed. So we lived in that cabin through the winter because they couldn't work on the homestead. So we moved into the homestead, early spring.
We're in our 5th year now living on the land.
So it's a really interesting experience. It shows how one delay, it was really only one delay that caused the cascade of everything else. And if that hadn't happened, we would have moved in and been nice and toasty warm at our homestead through the winter.
So that's our backstory on how we acquired the land and how we managed to move into the cabin just in the nick of time. That's all for this one. I'm Glenn.
I'm Maureen.
We'll see you next time. Over and out.
Take care.
You want to go?